Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge, a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services focusing on the Port of Anchorage and the major commercial participants in the Cook Inlet region, providing customers with marine services specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenwiller here to present your show this evening for Alaska Weather. It is Tuesday evening, April 28th, not quite August yet, April 28th. And as always, you can keep up to date with us on our website, arh.noaa.gov. Our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. And online, again, at weather.gov/Alaska, or keep up with us on social media, Facebook at NWS Alaska for the Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage office. And on Twitter, at NWS Alaska is our call sign, and you can use the hashtag AKwx for regional weather. And then you'll find this show and a few other segments on YouTube using the channel AKwx TV. So taking a look at our hazardous weather map for this evening, we just have one hazard to talk about, and that is a flood advisory on the Tanana River near Salcha. It's for an ice jam near Salcha, and it's in effect until 3:15 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, tomorrow afternoon. And we have had a couple residents report that there is some flooding in their yards, and so that's why that flood advisory is out. Will be in effect for about another 24 hours or so. That leads us into our breakup map for this afternoon. As you can see, those are the conditions that we are looking at for much of the state. Some open waters as we start to see more sun and more warm temperatures. And with that, we do have that advisory again for the Tanana near Salcha, and we'll continue to update this. Also, if you have any river reports to give us, we appreciate that. River Watch is in effect right now, and the Alaska River Forecast Center definitely would appreciate any reports of flooding or ice breakup in your area. So taking a look at our satellite map this evening, I'll slide off to show the main feature across the area this afternoon is our low pressure system, quite a strong low pressure system, hurricane force low. Moving through southeast Alaska, we had Ketchikan report a gust to near 70 miles an hour and some wind damage in parts of southeast. This thing is wrapping up and starting to lose some of its punch now as it moves onshore. It will quickly move up into the northern portions of Canada into the overnight hours, but still some gusty winds and some heavy precipitation in the area. There are a few embedded thunderstorms as we get off into Canada there, but just a couple strikes associated with that. As we take a look back towards the west now, we can see here as we put the loop into motion again, another weak area of low pressure towards the central and eastern Aleutians. And with that, just some light rain showers starting to mix with some snow on the backside, but even as of 4 p.m., the Pribilofs were still reporting just rain. For the majority of the state, though, we are seeing mostly sunny skies across a good chunk of the state. Down towards south central, we have just seen a few afternoon showers start to pop up along the front range here of the Chugach and some parts of the Alaska range. Possible lightning strike up near Wasilla as a storm is developing in that region. So be advised if you're planning on heading out this evening that there is the potential for some lightning with some higher cloud tops up there. And then putting it into motion one more time, we can see just a little bit of fog over the northern portion of the Brooks Range, and we do expect that to dissipate this afternoon, this evening, but then form once again tonight. It's low clouds right now, but it will drop back down into the form of fog and reduced visibilities up there. No advisories out at this time, but we could see visibilities down below a mile at times. So stepping into our surface maps now. And as you can see, or as you can't see, we do have that area of low pressure that will move from southeast Alaska up towards the northern portion of the state. And it'll become a little bit weaker at 990 millibars. And with that, it'll continue to bring some precipitations towards the Alcan border area, a little bit of snow along the border. But the bigger story will be what's happening down in the Gulf of Alaska. And with that, we expect continued onshore flow moving with this area of low pressure from west to east, pushing some light rain into the coastal areas. Some of this will fall in the form of showers. It could trickle over the Chugach and the Kenai Mountains into south central, into Cook Inlet regions, but not expecting anything heavy at this time. And again, our low pressure down here towards Kodiak Island and the eastern Aleutians down to 997 millibars, and that will continue to work its way to the east in the Gulf. Not expecting a major storm system from that one, but just some continued light rain and bringing down some rain and snow on the backside with a little bit of colder air. A little bit farther off to the west, we do have an even weaker area of low pressure at 997 millibars, and that one is just bringing some light rain and snow mixed to the central Aleutians, and as you work a little bit further to the west, we do see some pure snow falling out towards Shimia and the western Aleutians. And again, there's that fog now into Wednesday morning up along the Arctic coast. We do expect that to be rather dense overnight tonight and start to break up once again tomorrow as the sun continues to work on that area and help improve visibilities through the daylight hours. Our area of low pressure that was down in southeast Alaska is already up into northern Canada by tomorrow afternoon, and we expect that to continue to weaken down to about 992 millibars. Some rain, snow mixed in there along the backside, but mainly rain on the leading edge with some warmer temperatures. As we get down towards southeast Alaska, again, no major systems, but just continued onshore flow bringing light rain for almost all the coastal areas. Don't expect any major precipitation amounts associated with this system, but just that onshore flow keeping the potential for precipitation throughout the area. Our low is slow to work its way into the Gulf tomorrow at 997 millibars now, and you can see that frontal boundary starting to fall apart here in the western portion of the Gulf, and again some more precipitation along that boundary in the form of rain. Out towards the west, our low pressure has now fallen apart out over the western Aleutians, and we do see just a few weak areas of energy rotating around from north to south and eventually southeast towards the Gulf of Alaska. And with that, you can expect to see a rain-snow mix with a little bit of snow for the higher latitudes up near St. Lawrence Island. On into Thursday now. We can see our forecast for this low pressure is continue to weaken and slide off towards the panhandle at 1,001 millibars. Light rain will continue associated with that weakening boundary across much of the area, and just basically a cloudy and rain forecast for you all for the next several days. The winds, though, should be on a downward trend starting right now and going all the way into the Thursday forecast. Another area of low pressure starts to form in southwest Alaska. Again, not a major weather producer, but we do expect some showers to kick off across much of the Alaska range and towards the Cook Inlet region as this feature, which is known as a thermal trough, starts to develop. We start to have a little bit warmer afternoon temperatures, and we start to see in the inland valleys here, Palmer and Wasilla area, out towards the Copper River Basin, a thermal trough will develop, and that could produce some heavier showers, potentially even some thunderstorms into Thursday afternoon as that thing starts to take shape as we move towards May and in the warmer summer months. Again, just some rain, snow mix back towards Bristol Bay, and then as we step out into the Aleutians, you can see, or the Bering Sea, we see just some snow as moving from north to south associated with that trough. We do expect fog continues along the north slope, along the Brooks Range there, and that will be the case for much of the week as this high pressure remains in place at 1,023 millibars Thursday through the day. Taking a look at temperatures now, as you can see in southeast Alaska, highs were mainly in the mid to upper 40s throughout much of that area, and we did see a few colder spots towards the higher elevations. That's where they're getting a little bit of that rain-snow mix in parts of those areas of higher elevations, but even Chilkoot and White Pass were reporting all rain as of the last check this afternoon. Towards south central, we did see Valdez come in at 54 degrees. Anchorage was 52 degrees after we finally broke out of those clouds this morning. Down by Homer, it was 52 degrees, and on Middleton Island, 48 degrees. Towards the southwest, we saw temperatures upper 40s and even low 50s, 56 degrees for king salmon this afternoon. Taking a look more towards the northern portion of the state, we did have interior temperatures ranging from low 40s to mid 40s, and then eventually right along the Alaska Range there, just north of it, we had mid 50s. Up towards the Brooks Range, temperatures were in the low 40s to mid 40s, and then as you climb north of the range where that fog kept things much cooler, it went all the way from the low 30s along the range down to the teens. No single digits today, but down into the teens for the Arctic coast. Along the Seward Peninsula, generally between 20 degrees, and Nome climbing all the way up to 36 degrees this afternoon. And as we look towards southwest Alaska now, again, mainly low to mid 50s along the Alaska Peninsula, and Bethel came in at 48 degrees. And as we work out along the chain here to the eastern Aleutians, we saw generally mid 40s and slightly cooler out towards Cold Bay, Sand Point area, 39 degrees. The Pribilofs were 38 degrees and 39 degrees for St. George. And then out towards Dutch Harbor, we saw low 40s at 43 degrees there. And then by Shimia, where we had all that snow, or where we had just snow, it was 39 degrees. So taking a look at tonight's low temperatures, we do expect pretty similar conditions to the last couple nights. We have lows forecasted in the low 40s to upper 30s for much of the area. Slightly colder in the higher elevations, where we should see things change over from a rain-snow mix to mostly snow in the overnight hours. As we look towards south central, again, conditions pretty mild for this time of year, 35 and 40 degrees towards the Cook Inlet region. And as we look towards the interior, anywhere from the mid-20s to the lower 30s for the Tanana Valley. Up north of the Brooks Range, that's where we see our teens once again for our overnight lows. Not a whole lot of change up there with those low clouds firmly in place. Out over the Seward Peninsula, generally in the low 20s for low temperatures tonight. And then out over the southwest Alaska and into Bristol Bay, anywhere from about 30 to about 35 degrees for an overnight low tonight. So still not quite the growing season for many of these areas. As we get out into the Aleutians, expect mid to upper 30s, working from east to west, with the coldest spot being the Pribilofs at about 32 degrees. Looking at tomorrow's high temperatures now, we do have a similar forecast to today with upper 40s to low 50s, maybe a little bit more sunshine for you all tomorrow, but just be a few breaks in the sun with that onshore flow. Do expect mid to upper 40s for that area. As we get towards south central, looking for upper 40s to low 50s for much of the Cook Inlet region. And over the interior, anywhere from the low to the mid 50s, they'll be the warm spot tomorrow, as they'll probably see the bulk of the sunshine. And along southwest Alaska, again, pretty warm and mild in that area, 50 to 55 degrees. Seward Peninsula looking from anywhere from 25 to about 40 degrees for afternoon high temperatures tomorrow. And over the north slope, expect conditions to low to upper 20s for that region. Out over the Aleutians, expect anywhere from around 40 degrees to about 46 degrees as you work towards the towards Sand Point. For tomorrow's flying weather, mostly MVFR associated with those two areas of low pressure, the one working onshore from the Gulf of Alaska, and then the one out, the broad area of low pressure out over the Bering Sea. Just a few pockets of IFR conditions expected, where we do expect some pockets of fog and a little bit worse conditions along the ice edge out towards the west. And then again, there we have our IFR conditions associated with that fog north of the Brooks Range. So taking a look at our passes now, Anaktuvik will be MVFR, going downhill from south to north as we go towards that fog. Same thing with Adigan. Lake Clark and Merrill will be MVFR, and they should improve through the day to VFR. As we get towards Rainy, we see MVFR becoming VFR. Windy Pass, we expect MVFR throughout the day. Isabel, same story there. Mentasta will be MVFR. Tanita will be MVFR with continued low ceilings and some possible showers. Portage will be VFR going to MVFR as that onshore flow increases the precipitation throughout the area. And Chilkoot and White will improve from today's conditions and IFR to start the day, becoming MVFR by later in the day. Tomorrow's freezing level map, you can see our surface line continues to move just slightly farther northward through much of the state and especially over southwest, and then work its way off into the Bering. Generally expecting about 4,000 foot to 2,000 foot freezing level conditions across much of south central, and a little bit warmer with the onshore flow down into the Gulf, up all the way up to 6,000 feet as you get towards the North Pacific, and 4,000 feet there just south of Haida Gwaii. Taking a look at tomorrow's icy map, we do expect, again, above 3 and about 5,000 as you get towards the Panhandle. Just some light isolated moderate icing for those areas, and then onshore flow keeping light isolated moderate above 5,000 along the Gulf Coast. Our worst occasional widespread moderate conditions will be up associated with that low pressure center as it climbs quickly into the northern portions of Canada. Tomorrow's jet stream, expect conditions the jet activity to remain south of the state for the most part, coming down at 80 knots, all the way up to 135 knots, and then slowing just a little bit to 100 knots as it dives down in support of a trough over the northwest Conus, and then coming back up over a ridge at about 80 knots here into the central part of Canada. So looking at our 9,000-foot winds, again, our strongest winds are going to be right underneath where that jet was the strongest at about 50 knots down here, moving quickly from west to east in a zonal flow fashion. Over the mainland, fairly quiet conditions with just about 10 knots out of the south for Cook Inlet and about 5 knots out of the northeast over the northern portion of the state. Conditions from southeast becoming easterly as you wrap around that low pressure out over the Bering Sea. For 3,000-foot winds, northeasterly flow at about 10 knots over much of the mainland, especially the northern half of the state, and 30 knots becoming 15 knots wrapping around that low pressure just north of the chain. And our strongest winds, again, about 40 knots becoming onshore, 25 to 30 knots as we get towards southeast. And for tomorrow's turbulence, you can expect mostly light to isolated moderate, with the worst conditions being right here in the Panhandle as this area of stronger winds interacts with terrain. We do expect occasional widespread moderate below 6,000 feet for those areas. Stay tuned, we'll be right back with the marine forecast.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
It's kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It is just
moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make one lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
It takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
At the same speed.
Right. The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot.
I see.
And it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture. You can replay that and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called. These are stationary in appearance. And they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures that if you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites. That's the only way you can do that. The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet, and for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit,
Okay.
which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail, the kind of detail because you're close in.
Very high resolution.
You couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by, and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits, each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion, the same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun. They govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right, okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Amazing
it's
stuff.
A growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on GINA and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And welcome back to the show for the marine portion of the forecast. We'll start off in southeast Alaska here with no updates to the sea ice edge. And as you can see for Wednesday's forecast, mainly southeast flow, 20 to 25 knots, 20 knots out of the south for Lynn Canal, and seas generally between 4 and 5 feet. As we get out towards the open waters of the Gulf, we should see improving conditions with seas generally running, coming down from about 10 or 11 feet down to about 8 or 9 feet. And those winds will be out of the west and southwest. As we get towards the northern portion of the Gulf, expect 6 to 7 foot seas and generally 15 to 20 knots out of the south. On into Thursday now, conditions will be very similar to Wednesday. Seas should generally come down for the inner passageways, 5 knots becoming 2 knots as you get towards Lynn Canal. Southeast to southerly flow there, 25 knots towards the southern portions, and then 10 knots up in Lynn Canal. Out over the open waters of the Gulf, we expect southwest winds 25 knots towards the southern portions and seas 13 feet. Seas a little bit more friendly, 10 to 11 feet towards the northern portions, and winds generally southeast to easterly at about 20 knots. As we get towards south central Alaska, we can see Cook Inlet and much of Prince William Sound expecting north to easterly flow, improving there as well, 20 knots becoming 10 knots in the afternoon, and seas 2 to 3 feet. Out towards the Gulf Coast now, 20 knots out of the southeast for the northern portion of the Gulf, but then that becomes southwesterly, 15 to 20 knots, 6 to 7 foot seas as you get down towards Kodiak Island. For Shelikof, expect southwest 20 knots and seas 5 feet, and those conditions will remain predominantly the same for western Barren Islands. And then as you get towards the southern portion of Cook Inlet, expect northeast winds 10 knots and seas 3 feet. On into Thursday now, for much of these areas, expect improving conditions. Just variable winds now for northern Cook Inlet and for the Prince William Sound. Winds about 10 knots and seas 2 feet. And then as we get towards the open waters, easterly flow becoming northeasterly and then eventually northwesterly as it wraps around that area of low pressure, 15 to 20 knots and seas between 7 and 10 feet. Towards the western Barren Islands, expect variable conditions at about 10 knots and seas will be fairly light, 2 to 3 feet. Towards the Alaska Peninsula now, we're looking at for about 10 to 15 knots westerly, becoming variable towards Bristol Bay, seas 2 to 5 feet. And south of the Alaska Peninsula, westerly winds 20 to 30 knots and seas on the order of 10 to 14 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, expect west to southwest winds 15 knots, seas 3 to 5 feet. And westerly flow continues for the areas south of Chignik, seas 10 feet and winds about 20 to 25 knots. Over the Aleutian Islands, expect predominantly westerly flow. The only standout is northwesterly out towards Shimia, but westerly flow 25 to 30 knots, and seas will be on the order of about 8 to 11 feet, slightly higher as you get south of the chain at about 15 feet, where those winds have a little bit more time to interact with the water. And on Thursday, expect very similar flow out of the west. Winds will come down between 15 and 25 knots now, and seas will also subside slightly 2 feet north of Dutch Harbor, and then all the way up to 8 feet as you get south of Adak and Atka. For the west coast on Wednesday, expect northwest to northeasterly flow, north to northeasterly flow, 15 to 25 knots. It'll build up a little bit during the afternoon there with some stronger offshore flow near the ice pack. Down towards the Pribilofs, expecting just variable winds 10 knots and seas 5 feet. For Thursday along the west coast, winds will generally come down but remain fairly uniform in direction out of the north or northeast until you get south of Mikoryuk, and expect westerly winds at about 15 knots. Seas are going to be right off the ice edge at about 4 feet. And for the Arctic coast, expect northeasterly flow becoming northerly there, just north of the Seward Peninsula, fairly light at about 10 to 20 knots. And winds will not change a whole lot in direction and remain about 10 to 20 knots for Thursday's Arctic coast forecast. So recapping tonight's forecast, expect onshore flow to continue to bring light precipitation towards the southeast portion of the state. And we do have our low pressure system moving away, and that will let winds start to subside over the southeast portion of the state. A few weak areas of low pressure will continue to work from west to east towards the Gulf of Alaska, and those will continue to bring onshore flow and light rain for much of Wednesday's forecast. And on into Thursday, we don't see a whole lot of change in the pattern, with just some more showers developing over south central Alaska. Thanks for watching the show this evening. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.